The Pittsburgh Penguins are opening training camp, and after re-signing Sidney Crosby, we're going to talk a little bit about what that new contract means for him and the Penguins. We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL Podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen today. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Penguins, Hunter Hodies. And Hunter, what is the mindset right now for the Pittsburgh Penguins as the preseason is getting underway?
Yeah, I continue to be really fascinated and intrigued about training camp here. This is probably the most excited I've been for a camp in the last few years just because of how many jobs there are open. I mean, there's not too many, but compared to recent years, there's more than usual. You know, you have that top six job next to Sidney Crosby, his left winger spot. That job, I think, is wide open right now, whether it's Drew O'Connor, Rutger McGroarty, someone else, potentially former New York Islander Anthony Beauvillier, though I think bottom six is probably better for him right now overall. But that job is open. Then you have, I think, 2 or 3 spots in the bottom six that are open right now. And then you have the number 6 defenseman spot, which I think is open, whether it's Jack St. Ivany, who played really well down the stretch last year, or also former New York Islander Sebastian Aho, who has played quite a few games in the NHL. At the very least, he's going to be the Penguins' number 7, but I do see him at least being very much in consideration for that number 6 job. And then maybe you have some spots, you know, down in Wilkes-Barre and Wheeling for the goaltender situation, just because there is a log jam of goalies in the system behind both Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic. And the competition's already been really good so far, and I'm excited to see how it is, especially now the preseason opens tonight for the Penguins. They're playing a Sabres team that's playing quite a few of their regulars compared to the Penguins, who they're kind of playing a good chunk of their kids. You know, McGroarty is going to be in the lineup. Cody Glass, who they got from Nashville, will be in the lineup. Drew O'Connor will be in there. Puustinen, Puljujarvi, Benstrom. They got goalie prospect Joel Blomqvist getting the full start. He's the number 3 goalie in the system right now, the top goalie prospect, I would say, in the system right now, in my opinion. So it'll be a good test for the Penguins' young players going up against that veteran Buffalo group for a preseason game.
You mentioned Rutger McGroarty, big acquisition from Winnipeg. Do you think he makes the team this year? And if so, where does he fit in?
So I do think he's going to make the team. He's had a little bit of a quiet start to camp, but it's only really been a couple of days. I'm not really too concerned about it. I'm definitely more bullish on him than other people in the Penguins community. One of my bold predictions for, you know, this camp and preseason is that McGroarty is going to win that top spot on Sidney Crosby's left wing, just because I think the Penguins see him being in that spot at some point down the line. But I've been saying that I think he could be ready for it right now, considering the amount of talent that he has. This is the best prospect the Penguins have had in quite some time. Though I will say, if he doesn't win it, I'm not going to be really upset, just because sometimes these situations, they take time. You know, some prospects take a bit longer than others to really make the jump to the NHL. Maybe he makes the team and is on a third line role. You know, he's going to be playing on a line tonight with Drew O'Connor and Cody Glass. I think that's a line that has a lot of intrigue for me. We might see that during the regular season. And heck, maybe McGroarty potentially doesn't make the team out of camp. He has starts the season in Wilkes-Barre. I also don't think it's that big of a deal either, because he can continue his development down there, and then he'll definitely be coming up during the season for the Penguins. But I'm still very high on him. That was a really good move by the Penguins. Yeah, it was unfortunate to give up Braden Yeager, but I think McGroarty is a better prospect overall than Yeager. It can help the team now and into the future.
We talked a little bit at the top of the Sidney Crosby extension. To me, the big question is the length, 2 years. What does that mean for the team, for Crosby, and for the overall approach going forward?
Yeah, so I think, so obviously this takes Crosby through the next 3 years overall with the Penguins. That kind of coincides, again, with Chris Letang and Evgeny Malkin. He came in with those players. He wants to go out with them. There was really, no question that he was going to resign here. I don't care what people in the Canadian media have to say or anything like that. He was always going to resign here. He wants to be a Penguin for life. If there was one thing that maybe surprised me about the contract, it was the fact that it was 2 years. I thought it was going to be 3 years. And I guess if I want to take it a step further, maybe another surprise was that he just kept the same AAV of $8.7 million. I thought he was going to get $10 million plus on this next contract, considering that he's very much deserved to have an AAV like that throughout his career. But him taking that type of contract just goes to show how great of a person he is, both on and off the ice. He knows the Penguins salary cap situation. He wants to help any way he can and help Kyle Dubas just build the best team around him. And I think overall this sends the message that the Penguins, while they're going to continue this retool on the fly, this little mini rebuild, they're also, I think, going to try to still potentially make the playoffs in an Eastern Conference that definitely has some really good teams, but there's also a lot of teams there who I think are just kind of okay to average to, in that category. I think the Penguins are in that category as well. So I think it's a fine length, but I think after that, they'll probably sit down, have a conversation and be like, okay, after these 3 years, do you want to keep playing on a 1 year term? We'll keep giving you 1 year deals. Do you want to call it a career? Something like that. I can see them having a conversation with him about that.
What are some of the team's biggest concerns heading into the preseason right now?
So I think one of the biggest concerns for me, goaltending once again, is Tristan Jarry gonna finally put together a consistent season. I mean, he's been able to do it in spurts. When he's on his game, I do think there's a good goaltender in there, but he just hasn't been able to sustain it for a full season. I mean, last year he was really good in spurts, but then after, I would say, February, his game just kind of teetered and he just did not play well at all. So I think a good start for him will be massive for this team this year, but I still think it's a concern, especially when you look at the contract, 4 more years at $5.375 million per year. It's a hike. It's a lot of money for someone who I think overall is kind of just an average goalie in the NHL. You also have potential depth concerns. I think the bottom 6 overall right now is better than it was last year, but how much better is it going to be? I still think they could be potentially one more top 9 forward short heading into the year. I would like a little bit more scoring touch. We'll have to see if they're able to get that, potentially during the season, if the team is able to exceed some expectations. And then I guess if there's also a concern, it's just the power play again coming into this year. It was really bad last year, though they do have a new power play coach in David Quinn. Is he able to get more out of that? We'll have to see, but it's still a concern considering how bad that unit was last year.
Why do you think Jarry tailed off after February? Do you think he was tired? Do you think he just is streaky? What was behind that?
He's a very streaky goalie. I mean, this goes back to his entire career. He's a completely different goalie once the calendar flips to January or February. His save percentage dips, his goals against average dips. Every single, statistic that he has dips. I can't explain it other than I think he's just a very streaky goalie. He's played his best hockey in the first half of the season, but in the second half, it just goes to crap. And he needs to be able to change that this year if this team wants to potentially not contend, but just potentially get into the playoffs.
We talked a little about Rutger McGroarty. Any other prospects who you think could have an impact in camp this year?
Yeah, so I think Ponomarev, who they got from the Hurricanes in the Jake Ensel trade, he was really good during the Prospects Challenge. I think he will definitely have an opportunity to make this team out of camp. He's put together a pretty decent camp so far. I still think when I look at the logjam of forwards that are trying to make this team, he's one of the odd players out right now, but that can certainly change when, you play some preseason games and all that. I definitely look at preseason games, obviously, a lot more than I do of just training camp practices and all that. He's one of them. I would say Billy Koivunen as well. He also came over in the Gensel trade. I don't think he's ready yet, but I do think in the next potentially year and a half, he's going to get there. Tristan Brose, same thing. He's turning pro this year after coming over from the University of Denver. He was very good for his college team. He's playing in Wilkes-Barre this year. I do think eventually he could potentially be on the Penguins, but I don't think it's going to be just this year. But in terms of, other younger players for the Penguins, Valtteri Puustinen, I felt like he was one of their better depth contributors last year. How does he do for another full season this year? Jesse Puljujärvi, he's had a full off season, train after having that double hip surgery. a little over a year ago. So I'm curious to see how he is as well. You have Cody Glass. They got him from the Nashville Predators. Did not have a good season last year, but still a young enough player who is going to try to at least make a difference in this lineup. And then also Owen Pickering. He says he's obviously trying to make the team, but I think right now when I look at the defensive depth chart, I think it's going to be a tall order for him to make it. He's going to start the season in Wilkes-Barre, if you ask me. But, maybe he's on the Penguins at some point this year if some injuries arise or something like that. So, but those are some of the, younger players that I'm at least keeping an eye on. And then also, young goaltender prospect Sergei Murashov outside of Blomqvist. Murashov, I continue to be really intrigued about this kid. He put up some insane numbers in Russia as a prospect. I mean, these numbers were dynamite. He's now over in North America. I've been saying he's going to start the season in Wheeling, but I know he's also gunning for a job in Wilkes-Barre. Definitely have that name circled if you are someone who potentially either follows the Penguins or is maybe looking to follow the Penguins. He is a very intriguing prospect in this system.
All right. Well, I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. Hunter, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can follow the Locked On Penguins podcast wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, Sirius XM, etc. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodies, and then you can follow my co-host Patrick Damp on Twitter at Synonym for Wet.
All right, Hunter, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with quality candidates faster. Join the more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.